Hey everybody, it's Carm here, and La Director, back on after quite some time. Yeah, hope we're all doing well and enjoying your Thanksgiving weekend or whatever you're doing in general. Wanted to come on and share some tunes that, well, I started listening to one of them and realized that it brought me back all the way back to college era days. I didn't go to, like a big university or anything. It was just a little community college just outside Chicago called Morton College. A friend was reminding me of this, referring to one of those itty-bitty colleges for weirdos. So I'm like, oh, this is my place. But there were a lot of interesting characters who went there, during that time that I got to meet along the way. At those schools, you'll have people all the way from, just getting out of high school, 18, 19 years old, all the way up into their 70s, and in between, people who are going, working part-time and doing school at various times of life, or after retirement, and they have some spare time and they'll take some classes. So got to meet all kinds of people there during that time. It was between early 95 and about mid 99. My schooling, I didn't do it the right way. I mean, I would, mostly electives, and a semester on, take a semester off, two semesters on, semester off. I just it's not the way to go about it if you want to get a degree and all of that. But learned a lot during that time, during those years. I'd say more than all the previous school combined, grade school and high school. Some great teachers along the way and everything. And of course the music. There's always, throughout your life, it could be a matter of one song or an album, or just hearing it somewhere, and it inextricably links to that place and time, and the memory is always there. And now, well over 25 years later, in some cases it's still just as strong. And wanted to share a few. One of these, I started listening to something. I think one of the songs from it just popped into my head, so I started listening to it, and this is what prompted me to think about a little bit more about those albums I had heard during the time, which I just can't separate from the college going experience. So here's one of them from very early on, I think when I'd started in 95, Urban Nights. I think they made several albums with different lineups, different versions of Urban Nights. This is the original one, and it was bittersweet listening to this, being that, well, the music's very joyous, very optimistic, upbeat, buoyant for the most part, but three of the four core members here have all left over the years. We have Ramsey Lewis on piano, Grover Washington Jr. saxophones, Omar Hakim drums, and Victor Bailey bass. And Omar Hakim is the only surviving member as of now. But I remember hearing this on the radio, on our kind of contemporary jazz station, WNUA at that time. They played several cuts off of this, including the first cut on the radio. Very appropriate, and again, one of those tunes, very upbeat, very positive. There's a piece on here called Chill, which is actually quite it's actually kind of a partially rap number, kind of a rap jazz, which works here. I'm normally not into rap as much, but it's a nice blend. Hearts of Longing, which is a Omar Hakim piece, beautiful soprano playing by Grover, one of the ballads on the album. Very simple, but very direct, beautiful, very much heart on sleeve. Friendship is one of my favorite pieces on here. Just purely positive, very upbeat. A lot of nice hooks in it. It's very much, you could say, pop jazz, soul jazz, that kind of mixture. Very accessible, but there's always, especially with these kind of artists, it's kind of like the group Foreplay. it's deceptively simple, but there's a lot of little layers underneath, which you could hear layers of complexity, which always kind of brings you back to it. Miracle, Urban Samba, just a lot of really memorable tunes on here. It was produced by Maurice White, which I think adds to that whole flavor of it. But just overall, really an exuberant album, and I've heard the other ones since then, and they're all pretty good, but this one just really stands out for me. Yeah, you can see here, yeah, Grover and Omar. Yeah. And I think of, right away, it makes me think of being in school. I think of being in the cafeteria. The cafeteria of the school had these really large, high windows, so it wasn't really closed in. It had a feeling of, you always knew how it was outside, because it just, it was always very, if it was bright outside, you just filled the room. And even when I had taken a couple of night classes, it had a really interesting feel in there as well when you were in there during that time. But I sometimes would bring my Walkman and listen while in the cafeteria or waiting in between classes. And yeah, I bought this on tape originally, so I would just play it there. And yeah, it's kind of weaved in with the furniture that we would had these kind of long. It wasn't really a couch or a bench, but it was kind of like, a mixture, a combination of that, real long. It would be right in the middle of the hall, in between several classrooms, all on one side. And I just remember, you just rest there in between classes or however much time you had. And yeah, whether I had these songs with me or not, it was always going through my head, and yeah, it's always weaved in. So Urban Nights, if you like contemporary kind of mixture of soul and jazz, pop, this is definitely worth hearing. And of course, with all these musicians being in there. Next up, an old favorite artist of all time and group, Pat Metheny Group, We Live Here. For some reason, my CD copy is MIA at the moment, but if the DVD here, which just as fitting. This is on their 1995 world tour, live in Japan, and I got to see them for the first time in March of that year, 95, when they came through Chicago. And to this day, it's still one of the greatest shows I've ever seen overall. And again, seeing them for the first time, and say about half of the tunes are from the album, and half are from. Back in the 80s mostly. Of course, Pat himself on guitars, Lyle Mays, the late Lyle Mays, sadly, on keyboards, Steve Rodby, basses, and Paul Wertico drums, among others. Both of them, Steve and Paul, are Chicago natives. And when the album came out that they were supporting on this tour, We Live Here, I don't know what you'd call it, like a knee-jerk reaction of the 19-year-old who's, thought they knew a lot about music. I guess I don't know. I had this. They were employing these sort of hip-hop / techno beats, very modern, very different from anything they had done previously. The last few albums were in more of a Latin vein, but still very much with, the kind of the stamp that Pat and Lyle, being co-writers of many of the pieces, had always put on the music. But this was very different, very comparatively more urban sounding. And by that I mean it actually redolent of the city itself, the cityscapes, the streets, the area right around where I live. All these years, it had that feel, which it really hadn't had previously. But those beats, for some reason, I was thinking, they're just trying to be accessible, or they're trying to. I never thought of the term sellout, but I wasn't quite sold on it yet. But after about 6 or 7 listens, I could see they are. I could see what they're onto. It's like, no, they're not doing it. They're not compromising at all. They're really brilliantly employing these rhythms, these modern sounds, these soundscapes, and these beats to something that's very much their own vision. and you could hear it more and more, and the orchestration and arranging, and again, it's so subtle at times. There's so many little layers, and you could hear it every bit as much live as in the studio. And they kind of brought that with them, and it grew on me in a very short time. And this always brings me back, of course, not only to going to school. I had just started going to school at that time, and I also had my first car, which is a 1978 Ford Mercury Zephyr, four-door, custard yellow, one continuous seat in the front, if you remember those from that time, AM radio, no FM, no tape deck, one speaker in the center of the dash. If you turned it up too loud, the whole thing rattled. And there actually, on the AM dial, there was one station that I think really played gospel for the most part, but occasionally, maybe in the early afternoon, late morning, would be a little bit of jazz. And every so often, I'd hear a tune from this album on there. So that was nice, of all things on AM radio at that time. It was nice to hear that. And and just again, another album that will always be weaved with that time, going to school then, getting to see them live, and having the first car, and it all goes together. So We Live Here, Pat Metheny Group, 1995. Another album from an by then I'd been among my favorite groups for several years, maybe 3 or 4 years. Yellowjackets also came out that year, 1995. Got this a little later on. Dreamland, which at that time had would have been their fairly long time lineup. Russell Ferrante. Actually, I'll go on the inside. Larger pictures on the inside. Jimmy Haslip on bass, Will Kennedy drums, Russell Ferrante keyboards, and Bob Mintzer on saxophones and clarinet. If you're familiar with their work, it is mostly saxophone and keyboard oriented. One thing that's different on here than on previous albums, still keeping with their style of jazz mixed with other forms, music from around the world, as well as a little bit of pop and rock. Bob was playing more standard B-flat clarinet on here. He would usually play soprano sax, tenor sax, bass clarinet, but he was playing a lot of, a decent amount of B-flat clarinet, just the regular standard clarinet, which was really nice color and just lent a certain emotional pull to the music, which you're not used to hearing that texture in what they were doing. And I don't know if he had played much after that on subsequent albums, but it's nice hearing that on here, among other things. Also, Bobby McFerrin guests on one of the tunes, Summer Song, with his kind of trademark wordless vocals, but adding just another beautiful color and texture to the music. And immediately, this is another one that brings me back to that cafeteria. I remember listening to it a lot there, in between classes, and just that whole environment of that space. And even though I commuted in every day or every other day, didn't really meet many people, and I think a lot of people feel that too in college. You either you find a group, or you're kind of on your own, and I was kind of used to fine with that, being on my own anyway. But there was that real feeling, especially in that cafeteria. Almost that whole time I never really knew anyone. I was just kind of there, but always had the music. And this is one of those albums that kind of kept me company through all of that. So, Dreamland from 1995, Yellowjackets. And one more from that period. It's funny, I remember a lot from that year, that first year, 95, and not much over the next few years, and then 99 comes more into focus. But this is another one from 95. Quartet West, Charlie Haden, Always Say Goodbye, where he was going through a phase where he was exploring older forms of jazz. I think at this time in the 90s, there was maybe something of a renaissance in looking back at earlier forms, bebop, and even before that, just more traditional forms in general. And on here he's joined by Alan Broadbent on piano, Ernie Watts on saxophone, Lawrence Marable on drums, and himself, Charlie Haden on bass. And it's a combination of original tunes by the group as well as standards. Ernie in particular stands out for me on saxophone. This is the first album I think I'd really heard him on, and really fell in love with his sound. Just a really sweet, lyrical, kind of buttery sound on his horn, phrasing like nobody else. One of those players that you couldn't mistake for anyone. You'll hear people who they're obviously Coltrane-inspired saxophonists, very good. You could kind of hear where they're coming from, but if there was anyone else who sounded like him, I haven't heard anyone else who sounds like Ernie Watts. I mean, just as original as they come. And on here, it's perfect for what they're doing. That kind of late night sort of torch song. Again, you were talking about cityscapes before. It reminds you of the city, but from the 40s or the 50s. And in fact, they even kind of weave in some movie clips or some audio from films, Humphrey Bogart, and you could imagine the old detective stories, kind of weaved in there, and it's so evocative of an earlier period, and you imagine everyone in suits and fedoras, and it has that kind of monochromatic feel to it, but again, very vibrant and evocative. And this is right around the time where I was getting further into jazz overall, beyond what could be called fusion or just the kind of contemporary mix of the time. This got me a little more into the traditional stuff before I soon after got way off into the free zone and everything else, the avant-garde. But this is a brief time where I was just exploring the traditional jazz, and this is as good a group as any to kind of take me down that path for a while. So Quartet West, Charlie Haden, Always Say Goodbye. This one's from, I think, 93, this came out. And they did a few albums under this name. If you look up Charlie Haden Quartet West, you'll find a few of them. This is my intro to them, and still the one I go back to every so often. And jumping ahead a little bit, going to 99. Toward the end, I had taken a photography class, and at the very end, a painting class, and a lot of music, of course, is associated with that, but these are the ones that really stand out the most. And it was around this time, around 99 or so. That year was very hard. Late the previous year, my gram on my mom's side had passed on very suddenly, and it really colored the whole rest of the year, which was very difficult for, even at that age. I mean, you're in your early 20s, and even if you're the kind of person you are anyway, it can be very confusing, and if you're already going through a depressing time, it's tough, coupled with that. But this was among a few of the bright spots that kind of got me through it, as well as the classes I was taking. They were very therapeutic, and I was getting more and more heavily into this music, freer forms of jazz and improvisation. Circle, Paris Concert. Anthony Braxton, this is my introduction to him, on various saxophones. Chick Corea, piano, which was really, I think after this he was starting to go into more of a accessible direction, not as free, more towards Return to Forever and Latin-inspired music. David Holland on bass, great bassist, cellist and composer, and Barry Altschul on drums and percussion. But this is really, at the time, not knowing as much about these artists, I didn't realize how momentous this was, all of them playing together. This is a double album, I have the LP around somewhere. A double CD set as well. There they are again. And it really is kind of a touchstone album too, in a way, you know, introducing me to freer music at the time. You can see only a few tunes here, relatively few, spread over the two albums and the composers. Of course, in the case of this music, it almost doesn't matter. Not that it doesn't matter, but whoever composes the music or wherever the tunes start off with, you know, the kind of head of the piece, it always goes into a direction where it's a completely collective performance and evocation of the music. You know, it belongs to all of them. You see them helping a piano up on the stage here. There's Anthony Braxton there, reed player. I became such a fan of his actually at the time that, well, in that painting class, I actually did a painting of him in kind of a silhouette, and it was kind of mixed media where I was using tinfoil, shaped it in the form of a saxophone, and kind of pasted it on there, along with him off to the side in silhouette, with his arms kind of crossed, with, you know, holding a pen, and there was some manuscript paper. If you had ever seen his titles of his songs, they were done in this really interesting kind of arcane mathematical formula. That's how he titled them. Maybe thought of them as well. There they are, more assisting the piano there. There's Dave Holland with his cello. Also hearing Dave's playing, which he's become one of my favorite bassists by then. It's Barry on drums. Very original sound. His sense of rhythm, pattern, playing really kind of non-metrical rhythm, you could say, or kind of following the pulse. Really picture of Dave there at the time. 1971 this is from. And Mr. Correa himself. Sadly now the late Chick Corea. Lost him in over the last year or two. Again, Anthony and Barry. But this was really a fascinating ride, hearing them all playing together. Again, oftentimes starting in a very structured way, just with the head of the piece, and then just going way off. And Anthony's playing in particular, again on saxophone. I'd never heard anything quite like that. And playing such a range of horns, as well as all the sounds it got out of them. It was just fascinating at that time. And I was just remembering in that painting class, they had a stereo in there, the teacher, and said, oh, if you ever want to bring, you know, I think there was just a tape deck in there where there's no CD player. If you want to bring a tape or anything, you know, feel free. We could just play it during class. So, of course, I had put this on tape so I could listen to it in the car off of the LP, and I brought the tape one day, and yeah, I think after that day I was never requested to bring anything else. In that class there were, again, about the age range, I think I was maybe the second youngest in there. A couple people were in their 50s, and a couple may have been in their 70s, a couple of elderly women, and they were so sweet and really a lot of fun. One of them in particular, she had this kind of, you can kind of tell she had been smoking for a long time, because she had that real rough, and she was, you know, she'd go outside to smoke, and you'd see her right outside the window, and she'd be out there, you know, pacing around and puffing. She'd come back in and finish her painting. But she had commented on this music while it was playing. It's like, how long does it take for them to tune up? I don't know about this, you know. Which I guess is oftentimes leveled at, you know, free jazz and improvisation. But yeah, it's something I'll always remember, you know, playing that tape in class and painting along with it, and, you know, probably be the only one who by far enjoyed it at all at that time. So yeah. A Circle Paris concert from 1971. Another one will always be weaved in with that time. And another one here from all-time favorite group here. Tangerine Dream Tornado, or Tournado, live in Europe. This particular one was recorded in Poland, 1997. And again, right around this time, I was getting further. This is still in 1999. I was getting further into free improv, free jazz, avant-garde in general. You know, everything from the furthest out stuff, you know, getting into even things like Derek Bailey and Evan Parker, as well as Stockhausen and Ioannis Xenakis. So some of this stuff was kind of going further on the back burner. And this is, for Tangerine Dream, this is one of their less experimental. By the 90s, they'd gotten into more of a kind of an instrumental pop rock direction, even with saxophone and a lot of electric guitar. You know, just a different vein, much different than what they were doing in the 70s or even 80s. It was mostly Edgar Froza and his son Jerome, along with, I think it's Emil Hackfield on percussion, electronic percussion, and I can never pronounce his name. There's a guitarist on here who has Zlatko Perica, who is a very kind of, I think he's somewhere in the vein of maybe Steve Vai, Joe Satriani, as far as that style of playing, you know, very fast and technically fluid. It worked very well for what they were doing at the time, which again was more of a, you know, more of a pop inflected instrumental rock, even kind of dance club feel to it. But this was something that was really helping getting me through that difficult time, you know, in mid 1999, and was definitely a bright spot. That also, I never played it during the painting class, but it brings me back to that time and how therapeutic it was, you know, the music and yeah, the painting. You know, it was a medium I'd never really done before, and just you know, the feeling of kinship of just being with all these people of different ages and, you know, hearing their experiences in life. Most of them were much older than I was, you know, including the teacher, and yeah, it was just a nice, you know, it all goes together, you know, and it's yeah, just something that will always stay with me. And this is something I've listened to a lot over the years, and it brings me right back to that, to again, what's a brighter spot in a year that was otherwise you know, very difficult. So yeah, Tournado, Tangerine Dream, live in '97. And finally here, one, I think I've shown this before one other time, and if you know the core of my taste, it might come as a little bit of a surprise. New Radicals. They did a tune that was very big on the radio then, which actually was playing a lot when they would play the radio in class, in the painting class. You Get What You Give. Those of a certain, you know, came through the late 90s will remember this well. Didn't really care for the other tunes quite as much, but I did like this song, and it was years before I eventually picked up the CD, and it was actually a while before I even remembered what the title was, because I'm like, what is that song that got me through that time, you know, in painting class and all of that. But and even when I would listen to the lyrics, even if I didn't listen to the lyrics, just the whole feel and tone, not just the tone of the music, but the tone that the music set was something that really was very inspiring and was good medicine at that time. And to this day, it's still a song, probably my favorite, among my favorite, what you would call a top 40 song, you know, of all time. Just, you know, you can't help but not feel good hearing it, you know, whatever your taste. And again, by then, my taste was way off, way somewhere else, nowhere near this. But it's a testament to this, to, you know, what the music can do for you. It doesn't matter the genre or the style, or, you know, it's if it reaches your heart, it just does, you know, and you don't even have to ask why or how. It just, you know, but it'll always be there after all these years. So, yeah, New Radicals. You Get What You Give. More good medicine from that time. So, yeah. Just wanted to share a few of these. and music from college era days. Be interested to hear from any of you if there's music from your time, whether or not you went to school, after graduating high school or not. What were you into, between roughly 18 and 23, 24? And does it still resonate with you now, when you listen to it? And are there memories that are inextricably linked with that time that, just stayed with you? And I'd like to hear from some of you on it. If you want to respond with, a video or in the comments or however. Yeah, very great to hear more of that. This has touched off so much memory-wise, and again, the music still holds up. I've listened to it over the years, and a lot of it, and it's still, from revisiting it now, it's still, to me, it's as fresh as ever. But I guess I've always felt I've lived outside of time in a sense, like, past, present, future, kind of like just one thing, just one field, one event, in a sense. So it'll always be there for me. So I'd love to hear what you all feel about that. I don't know if you could hear what's in the background. It's Jeff Pierce, Lingering Light. He's plays guitars and synthesizers. Though on here it's the Chapman stick. His instrument of choice here. 2005, I think this is from. So, been enjoying getting into this. Something I didn't hear till, didn't get into his music till much later. So, yeah, a little Jeff Pierce. So yeah, thank you all for watching. Hope this wasn't too boring. I don't know. I feel like I kind of droned on, but didn't really say a whole lot. But again, would like to hear what you, how you feel about all this. You kind of going back through your own memories of those times and the music. So thank you once again, and hope you're all well. And the director is now out for the count. Till the next one. Peace, love, and joy.